Okay, so I'm wondering how many people are down pre-live or yeah, because we have a lot of formal questions and very little instruction.
Hello, everyone. Hello? Is the microphone? Yeah, I think it works. Hello. I'd like to welcome you all to the first session of the Human Rights Considerations proposed research group in the framework of the IRTF. This is the first time that I'm chairing a research group, so if something is radically going wrong, please feel free to correct me so we can have a session together, all the better. I wanted to start off by asking for people. We found a Jabber scribe. Would someone also be interested to take notes? Do we have a note-taking volunteer? We go once, we go twice, and the note-taking goes to DKG. Thank you very much. You'll be rewarded. Then let's quickly establish the agenda. If someone has extra points or amendments, I'd be very happy to hear them. We'll start off with the agenda bashing. We got the Jabber scribe, we got note takers. Go to the note well, do the introduction, go through the status of the proposed research group, delve the context of the research, do the discussion of the draft. See what the next steps are, see if there are other relevant research issues or topics, and have an overall discussion. Nonetheless, I would ask you not to wait with your questions and comments until the end. Let's do it rolling, and please go up to the mic if there is anything that you would like to react to or if anything is unclear. Let's try to make this session as interactive as possible. So the note well. Any submission to the IETF intended by the contributor for publication as well as part of an IETF internet draft or RFC, and any statement made within the context of an IETF activity is considered an IETF contribution. So statements include oral statements in IETF sessions as well as written.
Niels, it's the last day. If people haven't seen the note well, they should raise their hands and look at it.
Thank you for this useful contribution, Mr. Note Taker. I'll go to the next slide then. So we'll start with the status of the proposed research group. Go ahead, Joana.
Hello everyone, I'm Joana Varão. I'm a researcher on internet rights in Brazil. So far, since in 27th of October last year, we published the first internet draft on human rights protocols considerations. Then we presented it in a SAG session during IETF in Hawaii. After that, we updated before the session here and also did a proposal for research working group in the IRTF. During this IETF, we have been interviewing members from the community, also to feed on our research.
We've been able to do about 26 45 minutes interviews with members of the community, and we were given a proposed IRTF research group. And after a year of working, it will be evaluated whether it will be a more permanent research group. The context of the research in which this is taking place. So worldwide, the internet is increasingly observed as a tool for freedom of expression and freedom of association. But one could ask if this is by coincidence or by design. Some people would say that the technology reflects the people who built the internet in the first place. And there are leads in certain drafts that would say that there are values embedded, such as RFC 1958, which says that the internet aims to be the global network of networks that provides unfettered connectivity to all users at all time for any content. That sounds quite a lot of the right to freedom of expression as expressed in Article 19 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. On the other hand, one could also easily have a more engineering perspective to the issue and see that the internet came about as a solution to technical problems, and then the internet, as it is now, somehow became a happy accident. And this is what we want to research and understand. But as the scale and the industrialization of the internet has grown greatly, the influence of the potential initial worldviews started to compete with other values. And one could attribute this to industrialization, but perhaps also to a grown interest of governments around the world. So the belief of the authors and people working in this working group is that as the internet continues to grow, the linkage of internet protocols to human rights needs to become explicit, structured, and intentional.
So, considering this change in the scenario, we thought that the IETF is appropriate venue also to discuss this. Of course, because it's where protocols and standards have been shaped. Is it better? Okay. So we thought that was an appropriate venue to bring this problem. One, because of course it's where the fundamental standards and protocols that build the internet have been taught and designed. On the other hand, we were inspired by the work on privacy and the privacy considerations, and we think we can move forward and think about other human rights to do this similar exercise. So we are not going to, in this research first step, so focusing all the human rights, we decided to focus on freedom of expression and freedom of association.
The reason of doing that is that these are first-generation human rights, as they are known, and also to limit the scope of the research. So we're not excluding the possibility of other work done there, but to limit the scope mostly makes research quite a bit more effective.
So we tried to design a hypothesis, to test hypotheses throughout the research, and we departed from this problem statement that considers that decisive enabling characteristics of the internet, which are also human rights enabling characteristics, might be degraded, and if they are not properly defined, described, and protected. And if that doesn't happen, this might result in a loss of functionality and connectivity of the internet. So we are trying to frame the rights debate on freedom of expression, freedom of association in a technical manner. Try to grasp what are the technical concepts related to these rights.
And this is the challenge that we are for. So our approach also has been to read RFCs and to see what conceptions there are about technical concepts that would enable these rights. So we came across a lot of architectural principles. Now we've been thinking about a technical translation of user rights concepts, and then we see where these two could converge. And currently we're thinking that these concepts could be the basis of that. So we're thinking of interoperability, a distributed architecture, the end-to-end principle, reliability, resilience, permissionless innovation, transparency, data minimization, graceful degradation, connectivity, innovation at the edges, and content and application agnostic. And there are, of course, a lot of architectural principles that maybe do not necessarily impact users' rights, and an example could perhaps be the good enough principle. And of course there are also a lot of user rights concepts that do not necessarily focus on architecture, so they are not necessarily the best platform to be discussed in the IETF, such as consumer protection. So we try to leave those outside of the scope of the discussion here.
So we frame some research questions to address. The first one we are starting to grasp by those mappings of concepts. So it is, are there relations between protocols and the human rights for freedom of expression and association, and what would be those relations? A next step would be to think if the limitations of freedom of expression conceived in the previous step of these technical concepts can lead to a degradation of internet functionalities. If so, how? And how can we protect this enabling rights environment and safeguard the internet infrastructure on future protocols development? So the first step of the methodology was exactly to map protocols and standards that we thought that might potentially be related to freedom of expression and freedom of association, and then we came up with a first initial list of RFCs to analyze concepts.
So this is quite a long list, and I will not go through all that. There is a link in the presentation that you can download where we try to map the RFCs based on their relevance. But we started out with protocols and standards that we thought are relevant to freedom of expression and association. So we started with RFCs focusing on architecture, on transparency, on mailing lists, because the premise was that they enable in a distributed way freedom of association and collaboration. HTTP, because it's been quite crucial for freedom of expression. IDNs, because it allows people in a diverse in their own way to have access to information and to express themselves. And privacy and security, because we wanted to see how other considerations have been done before so that we wouldn't try to reinvent the wheel.
Then we move forward, trying to to highlight central design and technical concepts in these RFCs that might be related to the rights that we were trying to address. And also, as an outcome, you have also a list of those concepts.
So this is the list that we currently think of that could enable these concepts. Have a look at it. All your comments on this would be extremely welcome. So we're thinking of the importance of connectivity, distributed architecture, interoperability, reliability, scalability, preferring stateless over stateful, content agnosticism, transparent network, options for debugging, a robust network, an end-user-centric network, with graceful failures, a graceful degradation, partial healing, delay tolerance, and data minimization and compression. So these concepts, which are working assumptions, will function as considerations for the analysis of other RFCs, which will be further described vis-à-vis their impacts on human rights. And if one would try to make it in a bit more consumable fashion, then it could look like this. That freedom of expression is content agnosticism plus connectivity plus privacy. And if we would try to add a bit on that concept, it could look like this, where we would have freedom of association, which is the concepts of freedom of expression, plus interoperable protocols, a distributed architecture, decentralized protocols, robustness, and resilience. One could, of course, easily say that, for instance, robustness and resilience and a distributed architecture could also already be part of a definition of proper connectivity. So these are still things that we try to find the order of how we come up with different definitions. So that's definitely still a work in process.
So a second parallel step that is still didn't start it.
Sorry,
go
do you
ahead.
want discussion on particular topics, or do you want to wait until the end? All right, I'm Andrew Sullivan. It seems to me that this approach conflates certain positive rights and negative rights, and I'm a little concerned about the for instance, resilience here seems to require that the connection remain up and so on, or distributed architecture seems to require that you've got this sort of everywhere and that it's available to everyone, which is a little different.
I didn't hear acoustically. Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. It seems like, for instance, the distributed architecture requires that things be sort of spread around and available to everyone. But more importantly, the robustness and resilience here seems to suggest that the connection needs to remain up. That's a positive right. That's right. You maintain the connection, which is different from the privacy and content agnosticism, which is just you're not going to prevent this. The sort of negative rights case. It'd probably be really useful, and I looked probably not deeply enough at the drafts that you've got, but it didn't seem to me that this distinction was being made as carefully as maybe it needs to be. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Very useful.
Hi, Dave Crocker. This is fascinating. And I would agree with what you were just saying before Andrew got up, that those additional items fall under connectivity. I think they do that naturally, and I think that the list of 3 that you originally presented up at the top there is much more powerful. Lists of 3 always are more powerful than lists of 10 or whatever. But in fact, that my intuition is this is the right list to show people, and each of them is deep in their way. I think Andrew's point about affirmative capabilities versus passive, the ones that take effort to provide and the ones in which you don't want things to get in the way, is a really useful distinction. I have a pro forma question that, given my own background, I have to ask. Back a couple slides. One more. There, that one. Seems to me you shortchanged email by only listing mail lists. OpenPGP is a packaging standard for content, and it's important, but it's probably in the right place. But it just seems to me the ability to get a bilateral or small group, in particular ad hoc small groups, spontaneous small groups, but also just pairwise connection. That's what email will accomplish, that mailing lists aren't designed for. And I would expect it to be an integral part of what you're looking to achieve. But as an exercise, this is just fascinating. I'm really enjoying it.
Thank you very much. And I can tell you that email will be added. So, and I have one question back, if possible, and that is perhaps this definition would work quite well because there's a quite high level of abstraction. So would you also say that we would need to define content agnosticism and connectivity and privacy in a far more detailed way for it to be more meaningful, so that it would look more like this, that there is a sub-definition of all these things? But,
I would like to respond to exactly that question.
Okay, we'll go ahead.
So, Robert Sparks, and yes, I think you're going to have to at least pull those apart. My initial reaction to looking at the classification system here was I was having a hard time finding the places where you would tug on issues around conveying location in protocols. What the difference between protecting your privacy about where you are and statements about what other people can do with it, because those are 2 completely different things. And finding a way to hook these into the model that you're building might be a good tool for helping figure out where the level of abstraction needs to be.
thank you very much.
Yeah, Juan Carlos Zúñiga. First, just expanding a little bit on this, since we've been running this privacy trial and the privacy topic has been going on and on, Something also to take into account is that privacy is not about hiding everything. If the user is willing to disclose information, that's perfectly fine. Protocols should also allow that, right? So it's not just the fact of preventing, but having the basically the information for the user to take the informed decision of what is going to happen with his personal information. That's regarding the privacy part. Now, for my actual question here is, and I apologize if this was discussed earlier because I stepped in the middle of the meeting, but I think I've kind of understand and I agree with this systematic approach to taking a look at this human rights issue when coming back to protocols, because at the end of the day this is research and engineering way, so we do have to take a systematic approach. For the next slide. And I should say, for the freedom of expression, I think I have a clear idea of what we're trying to do. For the freedom of association and assembly, when we bring it to the digital world, I personally have a little struggle understanding how can I actually define this problem. Because expressing to me, it's a one-way protocol where I need to have a transmitter and a receiver, and that's fine. The freedom of association and assembly, it's not necessarily a two-way or a one-way protocol, meaning that right now we are assembling here a bunch of people, but it's only a few of us that are talking. The rest are just listening. So is this considered, the fact that I don't participate in the discussion and still I'm part of this group, is this considered association? Because I would need to translate that into protocols, right? Am I in a virtual world just listening? Does that make me part of the association and assembly of this group because I'm part of a mailing list, even if I'm not contributing to the mailing list? So that part for me, it's to make it more systematic and engineering terms, I would need to at least get some clarification on how we can define the freedom of association and assembly in a virtual world.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to respond directly to your 2 points, and I'll start with the last one. Mm-hmm. And with that, I'd like to go back a while and think about what Bertolt Brecht said about radio in 1908. Mm-hmm. And he said that the potential of radio could only be fully fulfilled if the audience would be able to talk back. And that seems something that we have been able to achieve with a variety of protocols on the internet. So I do not think necessarily everyone needs to talk all the time to be able to have an assembly. Actually, that would probably be a real messy assembly if we would all start talking at the same time. So I think it's the potential for people to organize together and to express their opinion and to collaborate. So it would probably be something like that.
But for the radio example, you could think that people could not talk back on the actual radio, right? They could write pamphlets, or they could send letters, or they could talk on the street. But the information that the radio distributed was a broadcast media that did not have a back channel.
And that was the problem with radio. And so that seems like right now people are able to talk back. So we'll need to look at protocols that enable people to talk back, make decisions, have discussions, and that would be then the infrastructure that would enable freedom of assembly and freedom of association.
Okay.
On your other issue about privacy and transparency, that's why transparency is in the list, because we really like that users and implementers and developers understand the consequences of implementing a certain protocol, and that is understood indeed which information is leaked or given away and or advertised and which is not. So we'll definitely work on that as well.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Hi, this is Corinne for the Jabber for Afnidoria, saying that she is just listening to this but does believe she's part of the assembly only partially.
Yeah, so great that you're there, Avri. Avri is the co-chair of this session, and she couldn't be here due to other engagements, but great that she's here and part of this assembly indeed.
Larry Messenger. When discussing architectural implications of rights, there are rights of freedom, but there are other rights also that might impinge on the freedom of expression. The right to have a copyright, the right to be forgotten, the right to be free from cyberbullying or slander. And I was looking for some mention of these countervailing forces and the architectural implications of living in a world where you have to balance one set of rights against another as being important consideration for the group. So if you could address that, please.
So I'm thinking about this definition and what you're using as a term that it defines, and it bothers me. Fred Baker,
Sorry,
by
could you
the way.
speak up because I haven't heard what bothers you.
Sorry. Swallow the mic. Fred Baker. So this definition and the term freedom of association or freedom of assembly, I don't think they go together. Okay, that's an interesting definition for something. But freedom of association or freedom of assembly is the freedom to come into a room like this, or in some equivalent way to be associated with each other. So I would think of freedom of association as being about being able to be a member of a mailing list, or having friends on Facebook, or something like that. It's a continuing status of being in some kind of a group, as opposed to my packets showed up, which is what this definition says to me, that my packets show up. So I think that's an interesting definition, but I don't think it defines that term.
Ladar Levison, I was just going to add up to that freedom of association. That concept is historically classified as the ability to be in this room without the mere fact that we're in this room causing us to be cast with suspicion. So the ability to listen to other people's ideas and receive them without just the fact that I'm listening make me a suspect.
Dave Crocker, one or two slides back. That one. That's a long, interesting list, and for a slide, you need just those words up there. Have you written explanations for the reasons each of those are individually are important, and by the way, what the arguments against them might be? I think that discussion that justifies both arguments against and arguments for each of these items will help people consider them more carefully and possibly end up allowing the list to be made shorter or maybe longer.
Hi, Daniel Kahn-Gilmore, DKG. So to comment on Ladar's point, I think the freedom of association, I actually think that in some cases the privacy issue is maybe even more relevant. I'm not trying to. It's at least as relevant for freedom of association as it is for freedom of expression. So if you go back and look at the freedom of association list, it's not just about privacy for freedom of expression. Concretely, privacy has to do with who you associate with. That's a critical element.
I'll try to respond to some of these extremely useful contributions to our thinking. Thank you very much for that. So I'll start off with the remark about the need for balancing rights, and I think that's crucial. And I think that's what a lot of the practice in human rights is about. When we're talking about freedom of expression, there are also considerations where it comes to privacy there. So my expression ends where your privacy starts, and vice versa. And we have developed ways to balance those rights, but then it would also be interesting to have the technical translations for balancing, so that when we make these choices, we make well-intended choices and that for the implementer, developer, and user, it's also clear what these implications are. So when they use a protocol or implement it, it's very clear what's happening on the wire or with their application. We had then about the single mentioned concepts. A number of them we have defined in a little bit more detail in our ID, but definitely more work needs to be done there. And I think indeed the approach to come with arguments pro and con is a very useful addition as well, also for the methodology. So that's excellent.
Just a note, I think by these initial discussions we could see that even the definition of freedom of association is not that clear in the Human Rights Declaration, so maybe we should go back to the debate on the social political context of that to go to the exercise of the translations as well. So I think there will be a follow step on this debate.
Yeah, as Fred said, he mentioned the mailing list as an example of freedom of association. Well, that was exactly why we also started off reading the RFCs about mailing lists. We ended up here, but apparently the link between those two is not clear, so we need to do more work on that, and we will be doing that. And then we will continue with the next part of our presentation.
Yeah, those next steps on the methodology are still to be developed, so are much more raw than what we have presented so far. But our next goal will be to start mapping cases in which these rights have been violated, to see if those rights were violated by exploitation of protocols and how it happened. So that's an idea that came up actually from the interviews that we have been doing throughout this week. So we are still developing how, but as possible guidelines for mapping which cases to address. We are thinking about going to situations of not legally sanctioned or out of jurisdiction blocking and filtering, and privacy violations in the context of freedom of expression, freedom of association.
Justin Richer, I was wondering if you guys were planning on differentiating between exploitations that are happening as a result of the protocol running as designed and the protocol not, or being like twisted and exploited or deployed incorrectly or what have you. Perverted. Thank you. That is a very good verb. In this case, I guess. No comment otherwise.
I think I think both, but I think for the research, the first might be the most beneficial.
Mm-hmm. I agree, and I would encourage you to be explicit about that differentiation when that does exist, because I do believe it does make a difference. Thank you.
Stefan Bartzmeyer. I'm not convinced that there is a difference. I am not convinced that we can see it. For instance, if someone, to shut down a website that he doesn't like, if someone is using a very simple DDoS HTTP tool, there is no trick in it. Loic used HTTP in the normal way, the way it was designed. It has even been said that it was itself expression to use this tool. So I don't think that we can make I think that in most cases you won't be able to say if there was a perversion of the protocol or not. I guess it's a dead end.
Justin, do you think you could come up with a definition of when a protocol would be used as intended and when it would be perverted?
So, I mean, I think a good example of a perversion would be like a DDoS. So, this is something where you are technically running everything inside the lines of the protocol, but it's being used in a manner that it was not intended for the protocol to be used.
No, that's.
Ladar Levison. I was going to say, Ladar Levison. I was going to say, I think it, while not necessarily a protocol, an excellent example of perversion might be the laws that were passed, well, about 12 years ago, mandating that every cell phone that's sold include a GPS chip, so that when you call 911, it can report your location to the emergency services operator. And the perversion would be activating those GPS chips remotely so that you can track all of the people where they are in real time.
So in both your answers, there seems to be a breach of intentionality of the protocol.
Mm-hmm.
But then we would need to watch carefully how intentionality is defined in the RFCs, because that's not necessarily clear in every RFC, and sometimes innovation also comes from other use of a protocol than it was originally intended to do.
He said that it's not about the intention of the protocol, it's about the intended use of the protocol. And what I was going to say is that it's our intention not to define intention.
Yeah. So let me clarify my comment there.
Your name, please?
Fred Baker. So your DDoS example. If I'm under a DDoS and my computer is madly responding, ICOMP, you can't get there from here. I'm not speaking. I'm not exercising a right of free speech. And the fact that I'm receiving a lot of packets is not a question of free assembly. Okay, so coming back to a previous comment there. But now then, the intended use of the protocol, maybe what I'm receiving is UDP messages that have a certain TTL or something like that, traceroute message. The intention of the protocol was to talk to a port or to determine the distance to a port from some other location. And the intention of my ICOMP is to say, fine, I'm this far away from you. But the intention of the person sending the messages is to cause me denial of service, to prevent me from being able to do something. So it's not an intention in the protocol. It's an intention of the party that's using the protocol.
Right, and along those lines, I do think that there is a categorical, or there may be, I should say, a categorical differentiation that can be made between protocols that are being used exactly as intended to cause and therefore cause disruption versus protocols that are being used not as intended but in ways that are allowed or twisted or what have you. So I think that that would be an interesting way to slice this.
Thanks, we'll have a look at that.
Dave Crocker, when I got up, I was thinking of saying something that turned out to be pretty close to what Fred said. I stayed up because I thought of a little more going, I hope, beyond that. First of all, what this has just done is to highlight differences between the mechanics of protocols, the administration and operation of protocols, the intentions of people who invoke the use of or create protocols. Those are different, but for this discussion probably can be kept together. And I found myself using the term policies and procedures as distinct from protocol. So and the problem with saying policies and procedures is that's usually the operations side. And above that, there's what I will call the politics, but I mean that the policy is probably a better term. And that each of these is relevant. They are decreasingly in the technical space, but they're the world that the technology gets used in regular use, in non-political situations. They are the layers above layer 7, but we can't operate without them. We would like to sometimes, but we can't. And they probably factor into this discussion both essentially and problematically. Essentially because we can't operate without them, and problematically because they frequently are distracting. They move us completely into the human side and the social side, which is not the point of this exercise as I understand it. I quite like the fact that you're focused on the technical issues and the way the technology enables or can prevent. And so, for example, the pointing out of abuses such as DDoS, I think, is also going to be useful. Thank you.
Andrew Sullivan, I really don't think that for the purposes to which you're looking here, the idea of the perverse use of the protocol versus the appropriate use of the protocol is going to help you. And the reason I don't think that is because this distinction sort of requires a telos for the protocol. That is, right, there's a goal for which the protocol is being deployed, and I like the way you put it, that there's some sort of intentionality of the protocol. That's a really hopeless road, precisely because frequently protocols are used in ways that maybe people didn't intend in the first place, or so on, and we do get a lot of innovation that way. To focus entirely on the human rights consequences of the protocol itself, then, what you need to do is pay attention precisely to how the protocol works, regardless of how people intended it to be used, and step outside of that. The intentionality of the individuals using it, to follow up on what Dave was saying, is quite different from the correct purpose, in scare quotes, of the protocol.
Thank you. Juan Carlos Zúñiga, I think I pretty much want to second and support the views from Andrew and what we just heard from Stephen. In the privacy, for instance, just for the little bit here of privacy, when we were discussing privacy considerations, what's exactly this? If we are planning to add a new parameter in our protocol that is going to add civic location, just because it's harder to get these GPS signals indoors and it's going to make easier for the technician to arrive, well, the privacy considerations is telling me that the intention is good, but actually you are opening a huge privacy risk by sending a civic address of a person over this protocol. So I second that. The intention may be good, but what I think we are trying to do here by having these considerations defined is letting people in the protocol design have this thought process where they say, okay, well, what if someone makes bad use of this protocol? And take that into consideration in the first place, so that we don't open as many accounts as we are doing these days. Right.
And with that, we might get to the last slides of our presentation. Let's see if we make it this time.
Just considering this exercise, we are going to, this exercise of mapping vulnerabilities will need a lot of help from the community. I'm not an engineer myself. Nils is an engineer by curiosity, perhaps. So even if you find something and can just send a link in the list, it will help tremendously. So it's also a bit of a call for help on mapping those examples. And yes, the next step, we still need to think further on this methodology, but using the concepts that we have been mapping, using the vulnerabilities, we want to go and check if the way it's being treated affects other protocols, affects other layers of the internet, and how does it impact in the internet functionality and ultimately in the user's rights. So it's basically getting all the inputs from the other research steps and trying to concretely address the research questions. As next steps for the research group, We'll continue the research on the RFCs and concepts and trying to match with the human rights concepts on freedom of expression and association, improve. Particularly, we saw that the one on freedom of association still needs a lot of work to be done. We'll continue interviews, trying to map those cases. We are going to edit the interviews that we recorded here and probably present it in the next, as a film, in the next IETF in Prague, and continue collaboration in the list. Did I forget something?
No, maybe Fred?
A new idea.
Could you go back one slide? Making relationships explicit. Oftentimes that involves authenticated identity. And from a human rights perspective, some things I've been involved with relate to specifically women in certain cultures that can only use their husband's computers, and might hide a Facebook account from their husband and use that communication vehicle to speak and to assemble, and explicitly want to be hidden for reasons related to their culture. And I wonder where making relationships explicit might in fact lead to human rights violations.
Fred, I think you're talking about a different kind of relationship than this slide is talking about. I think this slide is talking about making the relationships between human rights, protocols, exploits, and vulnerabilities explicit, not about making the relationships between particular humans explicit.
Lee Howard. My comment kind of goes back to, I think it was Dave said earlier, because the same tools that can be used to suppress rights or oppress individuals can be used to find people who are oppressing individuals and suppressing rights. There are bad people in the world, and I want to know that we can find ways to stop them while also protecting rights, and that's nearly impossible. I don't know how to do both.
That we do not know how to do it yet might also be a reason to do more research to see how we could do it. And our first step would first to be map these different cases.
Yes.
And then come up with a detailed analysis, and then we could make arguments about it. So that's so I would definitely not contest what you say. Actually, I would definitely say it's completely.
So I would like to see that as an explicit part of the analysis being done, is to make sure that we're looking at both sides. You know, I don't necessarily trust law enforcement, but I also need them. Thanks.
And that's why transparency is crucial there. So that when we make choices, we make them in full awareness, and we understand what's happening and what's possible. And that would then also allow for an accountable way of implementing these things. Because what we also came across in a lot of our interviews, or in several of our interviews, was that non-technical demands are sometimes made by institutions and by governments, and then it's really hard to fit that in a technical way. So if we would have a technical approach and an understanding of that, if people would then come to the IETF or then we say, well, there are these options, and this has that implication, this has that implication, and we chose for this because of this. So it's a kind of future-proofing our approach to protocols and standards. And I really hope that we can further build on your insights and your knowledge and your experience on the list. So we really hope that can get your insights there, and we continuously post our discussions and ideas and new topics there. And if there are then no other questions either from the scribe or at the mic, then I think we're done with this session, and I would like to thank you very much for your attention and for your attending this session. Thank you very much. Has everyone filled in the blue sheets? Blue sheets? Hi. And then that would then fit under privacy and not freedom of association. So this was exactly. Oh, totally. Yeah, that's why it's explicitly in the freedom of expression. Yeah, definitely. Thanks. Hi. Hi, Niels. Yeah, so actually what the ideal, the objective would be that we can define essential